You're the child Mom never wanted. My sisters said it at the funeral dinner, in front of everyone, like it was a fact carved into stone. But if that was true, why did the family lawyer walk in minutes later with a letter that made her drop her glass? My name is Natalie Gibson. I'm 35 years old, a senior financial analyst in Chicago. Numbers make sense to me. Patterns make sense. Evidence makes sense. Family never did. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of how I spent 15 years believing I was unwanted, and how, in a single evening, I learned that silence can be engineered, love can be hidden, and the person who speaks the loudest is sometimes the one with the most to hide. If you've ever wondered whether you were the problem in your own family, stay with me. I used to think I was too. I drove 4 hours to get to my mother's house in Connecticut, the same highway I'd taken too many times for emergencies, never for celebrations. The trees were bare, winter clawing at the landscape, and with every mile, I felt myself shrinking not into the woman I had built in Chicago, but into the girl who grew up in the shadow of someone louder, prettier, easier to love. Madison. My older sister had always known how to fill a room. I had always known how to make space for her to do it. Mom had died 3 days earlier. The call came from Madison, of course. Her voice had that tight, efficient sadness she used when she wanted credit for suffering. "It was peaceful," she said. "At least she's not in pain anymore." I remember standing in my kitchen after we hung up, staring at the tile, waiting for grief to hit me properly. Instead, what came was guilt, old, familiar, automatic. I should have tried harder. I should have called more. I should have gone home. But trying requires two people picking up the phone, and for 15 years, every time I called, Madison answered. "Mom's tired. Mom's confused today. Mom said she needs space, Natalie." Space. Such a polite word for exile. Still, I packed a bag. Because even if you think you're the daughter your mother stopped wanting, you still come to her funeral. You always come. The house looked smaller than I remembered, like grief had pressed the walls inward. Cars lined the street. Coats filled the hallway. The smell of catered food drifted from the dining room, mixing with perfume and the low hum of relatives catching up in whispers that died when I walked past. Some of them hugged me. Most gave me that careful, sideways look people reserve for someone they've heard complicated things about. I knew the story they believed. Natalie left. Natalie chose her career. Natalie never called. Poor Mom, waiting by the window. I had heard versions of it for years, carried back to me in awkward conversations, in pauses, in the way invitations slowly stopped arriving. It's a strange thing, to be erased by rumor while you're still alive. Madison found me near the doorway to the dining room. She wore black, of course, elegant and composed, mascara perfect, grief arranged like an accessory. She hugged me lightly, cheek brushing mine. "I'm glad you made it," she said. Not "I'm glad you're here," just that I had made it. Like a delivery. Dinner was loud in the way gatherings get when people are trying to outrun sadness. Wine poured freely. Stories about Mom floated around the table, some of them sweet, some polished by repetition. I tried to join in once or twice, but Madison had a way of redirecting conversations mid-breath. "Oh, Natalie wouldn't remember that," she'd say, smiling. Or, "You know how busy she always was." Each time, the table nodded. A soft verdict, delivered again. I felt myself retreat, inch by inch, into the quiet place I'd built to survive these rooms. Then came the moment. Madison tapped her fork lightly against her glass. Not enough to make a speech, just enough to gather attention. Her eyes found mine, bright with something sharper than grief. "You know," she said, almost laughing, "it's funny how families work." A few people smiled politely. "Some children stay," she continued. "Some leave." The air shifted. I felt it before I understood it. She tilted her head toward me. "And some," she said, "are the child Mom never really wanted. Everyone knew it. I mean, why else would she stop calling?" The words hung there, impossible to retrieve. A cousin let out a startled chuckle, thinking maybe this was dark humor. An uncle hid his discomfort in his whine. Someone murmured Madison's name like a warning. but she was already committed. Right? She pressed. We all saw it. Heat crawled up my neck. My ears rang. Part of me wanted to stand, to shout, to list every unanswered voicemail, every birthday spent staring at my phone, every letter I had written into the void. But humiliation is paralyzing. It convinces you that movement will only make the spectacle worse. So I sat there. And the worst part? A traitorous, broken piece of me whispered, maybe she's right. Because when someone you love is silent long enough, silence starts to sound like truth. I folded my napkin in my lap to keep my hands from shaking. I told myself I would endure dinner the way I had endured 15 years, quietly, invisibly, without making anyone uncomfortable. What was the point of fighting a story everyone had already memorized? Then the front door opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the sound cut through the room like reality, arriving late to its own trial. We all turned. A man stepped inside, tall, composed, carrying a leather folder and a sealed envelope. I didn't recognize him. Madison did, and I watched the exact moment confidence left her face. Good evening, the man said gently. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Attorney Miller. No one spoke. He lifted the envelope slightly. Mrs. Gibson left instructions, he continued. This is to be read tonight, before the will tomorrow. I felt something move inside my chest. Not hope. I had trained myself not to hope, but doubt. Doubt in the story I had swallowed. Doubt in the shame I carried. Doubt in the certainty on my sister's face. Madison's fingers tightened around her glass. And for the first time in 15 years, she looked afraid. I didn't know it yet, but the life I thought I understood was already over. The truth was in that envelope, and it was finally my turn to hear it. Attorney Miller didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority was already in the envelope. I remember how small the room suddenly felt, how the scrape of chairs against the floor sounded too loud, how the air itself seemed to lean toward him. A minute earlier, my humiliation had been entertainment. Now it was evidence waiting to be reconsidered. Madison set her glass down carefully, like sudden movements might change whatever was about to happen. I stayed in my chair because I didn't trust my legs. For those of you who don't know me, Attorney Miller said, calm and precise, I represented Mrs. Gibson in her estate planning. She left very clear instructions regarding tonight. He looked around the table, making sure everyone understood this wasn't improvisation. This was choreography, written by my mother. He slid a finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope. I watched Madison's throat move as she swallowed. And as ridiculous as it sounds, my first thought wasn't what is Mom going to say. It was she planned this, which meant, at some point before she died, my mother knew something none of us did. Before I tell you what he read, I need to take you backward a few hours, because that's when the ground had already started shifting under my feet, and I didn't recognize it yet. When I arrived at the house that afternoon, before dinner, people were still setting up tables and arguing about flowers and who forgot to bring ice. The normal chaos that pretends death is just another errand. Madison met me at the door, efficient as ever, already directing cousins toward tasks. She hugged me with one arm while checking her phone with the other. You can put your bag upstairs, she said. We'll eat in an hour. I nodded, grateful for instructions. In that house, I had always needed instructions. Without them, I felt like I might touch something I wasn't supposed to. Upstairs, my childhood bedroom had been turned into storage. Boxes, old coats, a treadmill nobody used. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Erasure usually comes in small, practical forms. I put my bag down and stood there for a moment, listening to the noise from below, wondering what it would feel like to belong to it. I almost left then. I almost told myself I had shown my face, done my duty, proven I wasn't heartless. But I stayed. Because somewhere beneath 15 years of confusion, I still wanted my mother to have wanted me. Dinner came. Madison performed. You already know that part. What you didn't see was the exhaustion underneath my silence. Every accusation she made was one I had rehearsed answers to in my head for years. I called. I wrote. I tried. But the more times a lie is repeated in a group, the heavier the truth becomes. Eventually, it feels selfish to keep lifting it. So when Madison said she always had an excuse, the family nodded. They had been fed that version for a decade and a half. It was familiar, comfortable. Then Aunt Helen asked about the birthday cards. I can still see the way her forehead folded when I told her I never received any. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet math, failing to balance. And Madison moved fast, didn't she? Too fast, sweeping her away toward the kitchen before numbers could turn into questions. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. That grief makes everyone suspicious. I had no idea suspicion was the most rational thing in the room. Now we were back at the table, staring at Attorney Miller. He unfolded the letter. "My family," he read. "If you are hearing this tonight, it means I am no longer there to explain it myself." The sound of my mother's voice filtered through a stranger, formal and careful, went straight through me. I hadn't heard her speak freely in years. Every conversation we'd had toward the end had been monitored, redirected, shortened. I used to wonder why she sounded distant. Now I wondered who had been standing beside her. Attorney Miller continued. "I need something read before my will because I have lived with a terrible misunderstanding, and I will not carry it with me." Madison shifted in her seat. I noticed it because she stopped acting. The mask slipped just a little, and underneath it was calculation, fast and frightened. "I believed," he read, "that my daughter Natalie chose to leave me. I believed she stopped loving me." A murmur rippled through the table. There it was, the official confirmation of what everyone thought. My stomach dropped. Of course, even in death, the story held. But he kept reading. I was wrong. 2 words. Madison inhaled sharply. I felt it like a hand reaching through years of fog and grabbing me by the collar. "I was wrong," he read again, slower this time. "And I discovered the truth too late." The room didn't move. Even the cousins who had laughed earlier looked confused, as if they'd misheard. Attorney Miller turned the page. "For years I was told Natalie did not want contact with me. I was told she would not answer calls, that she had said cruel things about our family, about me. I believed it because I did not know where else silence could come from." My eyes burned. Because yes, exactly, where else could it come from? "I know now," he continued, "that silence can be created." Aunt Helen put a hand over her mouth. Madison whispered, "No," so quietly I might have imagined it. But I didn't think so. Because for the first time, she looked like someone watching a door she'd locked begin to open from the other side. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt terrified. Because if my mother had been wrong about me, then I had been wrong about her, which meant 15 years of grief had been built on a lie neither of us chose. And if that was true, then someone had built it for us. I knew who. I just wasn't ready to say it yet. Attorney Miller lowered the pages slightly. "There is more," he said. "But Mrs. Gibson asked that the rest be shared tomorrow during the formal reading." A collective exhale filled the room, relief mixed with dread. Not finished. Just begun. Madison stood too quickly, chair legs screeching. "This isn't fair," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "Mom was sick." She was confused at the end. Attorney Miller met her eyes. "This letter," he replied evenly, "was written while she was under independent evaluation. She wanted to be very certain of her words." Madison sat down again. And I realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. For 15 years, my sister had been the narrator of my life. Tonight, the script had changed. I looked around the table at faces that had pitied me, judged me, dismissed me. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Madison. And for the first time, they were unsure. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just sat there, heart pounding, as the first crack split straight down the middle of the story that had imprisoned me. Tomorrow, my mother had promised, we would understand everything. And judging by the way my sister's hands were shaking, she already did. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the hotel room, staring at the thin line of light beneath the curtains, my mother's words repeating over and over in my head. I was wrong. Silence can be created. I had built my adult life around the opposite conclusion. I had shaped myself around the belief that my own mother had decided I was easier to lose than to love. That belief had followed me into relationships, into friendships, into the way I apologized too quickly and left rooms before anyone could ask me to. If she had been wrong, Then who had benefited from that mistake? Every path in my mind led to the same door. Madison. But even thinking it felt dangerous. Accusing your sister of stealing 15 years of your life is not a small thought. It is an earthquake. You don't want it unless you're certain the ground is already gone. Around 2 in the morning, I got up, turned on the lamp, and read the short note my mother had written me again, the one Attorney Miller had pressed into my hand after the dinner. I found your letters, Natalie, all 127 of them. I'm so sorry I didn't find them sooner. Tomorrow, you'll understand everything. Found them. Where could letters possibly be, if not with the person they were mailed to? I tried to picture my careful handwriting, the stamps, the drop into the mailbox outside my apartment in Chicago. I had imagined those envelopes traveling across states like small, loyal messengers. How had they gotten lost inside her own house? And how had Madison never mentioned them? The questions circled until morning. By the time I dressed for the will reading, I felt hollowed out, like whatever happened next would either rebuild me or finish the demolition. I arrived early. The living room had been rearranged overnight into something that looked almost official, folding chairs in rows, a small table at the front. The wooden box I'd seen the night before sat beside Attorney Miller's folder like it had been waiting its turn to speak. Madison was already there, of course. Front row, black dress again, tissue in hand. She looked like someone determined to resume control of a conversation that had slipped. When I stepped inside, a few relatives glanced at me and then away. Not hostile, not warm. Uncertain. It was amazing how quickly certainty evaporated once doubt had permission to exist. I took a seat near the aisle. Close enough to see, far enough that I wouldn't feel trapped. Attorney Miller waited until 10 o'clock exactly. He closed the door, adjusted his glasses, and gave the room a look that was both kind and unmovable. Today, he said, we continue with Mrs. Gibson's instructions. He began with small distributions, jewelry, furniture, personal keepsakes. Madison nodded along, absorbing them like proof that normal life still applied. Then he paused. To my daughter Natalie, he read, I leave my mother's wooden box and all contents of the locked filing cabinet in my study. Attorney Miller will provide the key. A murmur ran through the chairs. Madison's shoulders loosened just a little. A box, old papers, sentiment, nothing dangerous. But then he added, she referred to these items as the truth Natalie deserved. The shift in Madison was immediate. It was subtle, but I saw it. Her spine stiffened, her jaw tightened. Something behind her eyes started calculating exits. Attorney Miller held out a small brass key. You may open the box now, he said. Or you may wait. I don't know what made me do it in that moment. Maybe it was the years of being told to wait. Wait until Mom felt better. Wait until emotions cooled. Wait until later. Later had stolen half my life. I'll open it now, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, steady, almost professional. The voice I used in meetings when millions of dollars depended on accuracy. I walked to the table. Every step felt amplified. Inside the wooden box lay a photo album and a letter. I picked up the album first, and my knees nearly gave out. There I was. 15 years of me. Newspaper clippings about promotions. Printed photographs pulled from the internet. Screenshots of conference panels I'd spoken on. Even pictures taken from across the street during the 3 short times I'd visited home, me standing by my rental car, me hesitating near the walkway, me looking at the house like it might reject me. I remembered that moment vividly. I had almost knocked. Instead I left, telling myself if Mom wanted to see me, she would have asked. She had been watching from the window. She had been collecting me the only way she knew how. My hands shook as I opened her letter. Natalie, it began. I thought you hated me. Madison told me you said I was a burden, that you were relieved to be free, that you didn't want contact. I believed her because you never called and never wrote back to the things I sent. A sound escaped me, half sob, half disbelief. I had written every month. Every month. I was so proud of you, the letter continued. I followed your life from whatever pieces I could find. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I'm sorry I gave up trying. Someone behind me whispered, Oh my God. I could barely see through the tears, but one fact had become terrifyingly clear. My mother thought I had never written to her, which meant someone had made sure she never saw the letters. I already had the key in my hand. I turned toward the hallway that led to her study. No one tried to stop me. The filing cabinet was exactly where it had always been, metal and ugly and impossible to ignore. I had walked past it my entire childhood. It had held tax records, appliance manuals, warranties, ordinary things. I slid the key into the lock. It opened easily. Inside were 2 stacks of envelopes. The first stack was in my mother's handwriting, addressed to me in Chicago. Each one had been opened, then clipped with a small note. Return to center. Wrong address. Undeliverable. I pulled one free and turned it over. No postal mark. No ink. They had never left the house. My vision narrowed. The second stack made my heart stop. My envelopes. All satakaksikymmentäseitsemän. Opened. Handled. Saved. A note from my mother rested on top. I found these in Madison's safe 2 years ago. She kept every letter you ever sent me. I did not know until then. I sank to the floor. For 10 years, I had investigated corporate fraud, men and women who built entire realities out of altered documents and controlled information. I knew how deception worked. You isolate the target. You control communication. You become the translator of truth. Madison had done exactly that. Incoming mail, outgoing mail, phone calls. She had stood between my mother and me and edited us out of each other's lives. Not because of misunderstanding. Because of design. I spread the letters around me, dates flashing like timestamps of my own abandonment. Except I hadn't abandoned anyone. I had been trying the whole time. And so had my mother. We had been reaching toward each other across a bridge someone kept lifting. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually I heard footsteps in the hallway. Murmurs from the living room, the family waiting for something they did not yet have the courage to name. I gathered the evidence in my arms. My grief had changed shape. It was no longer about not being loved. It was about having that love stolen. When I walked back toward the living room, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, Madison was finally going to have to live in the same reality she had forced on me. And reality, unlike rumor, comes with receipts. I remember thinking, as I walked back down the hallway with my arms full of envelopes, that I had spent half my life begging to be heard. Now the truth was so loud it felt dangerous to carry. The living room conversations thinned when they saw my face. People have a strange instinct for seismic shifts. They may not know what happened, but they can feel when gravity has changed. Madison was standing near the fireplace with a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked up, and for a split second her eyes met mine. If guilt had a color, it would have been the gray draining across her skin. She looked away first. Attorney Miller noticed the letters immediately. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded once, like a man watching a prediction come true, and gestured for everyone to sit. Chairs scraped. No one wanted to be the last one standing. I stayed near the side of the room, clutching the stacks against my chest, my heart beating so hard it almost hurt. A part of me had expected rage to arrive by now, some cinematic fury that would carry me through the confrontation. Instead, I felt heartbreak. 15 years. Christmases, birthdays, random Tuesdays, when I stared at my phone and wondered why my mother could let me disappear. She hadn't. She had been disappeared. Attorney Miller opened the folder again. "We will proceed with the second part of Mrs. Gibson's will," he said. This is a formal statement she requested be read aloud in full. Madison sat down very slowly. I could see the tremor in her hands. He began. "For 15 years, I believed my youngest daughter had chosen to leave me. I believed she did not love me. I believed her absence was her decision." A few people shifted uncomfortably. They had built entire opinions around those assumptions. You could almost see them bracing. I was wrong. The words moved through the room like a current. "My daughter Natalie did not abandon me," he continued. "She was prevented from reaching me by someone I trusted." Madison made a small sound, barely audible, but it sliced through me. I didn't look at her. I couldn't yet. If I did, I might lose the fragile control holding me upright. Attorney Miller kept reading. When I tried to call Natalie, Madison would answer and tell me Natalie did not wish to speak to me. Sometimes she pretended to be someone else. She said my daughter had moved on and did not want contact. Aunt Helen gasped softly. Across the room, my uncle stared at the carpet like it might swallow him. I believed this, my mother wrote. I believed it because every letter I sent Natalie was returned to me with explanations I did not question. The envelopes in my arms suddenly felt like they were burning. Madison took my letters from the outgoing mail, he read, and brought them back to me days later, telling me they had been undeliverable. I did not examine them carefully. I trusted my daughter. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Trust is such a simple weapon. It requires nothing except faith. And Madison had aimed it perfectly. I later discovered, Attorney Miller continued, that Natalie had written to me consistently for years. I found 127 letters in Madison's possession. She had opened them and kept them from me. This time, there was no murmur. Just silence. Thick, suffocating, ashamed. Because everyone in that room had participated in the result of that lie, they had judged me. They had repeated the story. They had let me carry it. Madison suddenly stood. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice breaking at the edges. Mom was confused. She was sick. She didn't know what she was saying. Attorney Miller lowered the page, but did not lose his composure. "The statement was notarized 18 months ago," he replied. At the time, Mrs. Gibson had documented cognitive capacity. She anticipated this objection. Madison's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She sat. I realized then that this was the first conversation in our lives she could not dominate. There was paper now, and paper doesn't flinch. But my mother wasn't finished. When my husband was hospitalized, the letter continued, Madison delayed informing Natalie. She then told our family that Natalie refused to come. This was untrue. Natalie arrived as soon as she was told, but by then it was too late. The memory detonated inside me. The frantic packing, the drive, the hospital corridor, my uncle's disappointed face. I had blamed myself for years. Madison had choreographed my failure. I heard someone swear under their breath. I heard a cousin start crying. Madison had shrunk into her chair, hands clasped so tightly they looked bloodless. I wondered if she was replaying every lie, calculating how many witnesses now existed. All the judgments made about Natalie's character, my mother wrote, were based on information provided by Madison. That information was false. I closed my eyes. I had wanted vindication so badly once. I used to fantasize about some dramatic reveal where everyone would suddenly understand I hadn't been heartless. But standing there, listening to it happen, I felt no victory. Just grief for how easy it had been to believe the worst of me. Then Attorney Miller turned a page. There was a hesitation in him now, like even he respected the weight of what came next. In addition to interfering with my relationship with Natalie, he read, Madison has taken money from me. The air in the room changed again. Different fear. Over 5 years, withdrawals disguised as repairs, medical costs, maintenance, amounts large enough to be noticed only when laid side by side. 3 years ago, a mortgage taken against the house without true authorization. Documents redirected. Signatures questioned. I watched realization dawn across faces that had once looked at me with suspicion. Madison hadn't just needed me gone emotionally. She had needed me gone administratively. No second set of eyes. No questions. No interference. It was efficient. It was devastating. Attorney Miller spoke calmly about documentation, about reviews, about processes that would move forward independent of anyone's feelings. Madison looked like someone trying to remember how breathing worked. And then my mother's final line in that statement arrived. I leave it to Natalie, he read, to decide what happens next. This is not about revenge. It is about giving my daughter back the voice she lost. Every head in the room turned toward me. I hated it. I had spent 15 years invisible, and now I was suddenly the center of gravity. I didn't know what my face showed. I only knew what my chest held. Love, proven too late. Pain, documented. Truth, undeniable. Madison's eyes met mine again. For once, she wasn't asking me to stay quiet. She was begging me to. I gathered the letters tighter in my arms. For years, she had spoken for me. Now the silence belonged to her, and she had no idea what to do with it. When the reading stopped, nobody moved. It was the strangest thing. A room full of adults, people who had opinions about everything for 15 years, suddenly unsure whether they were allowed to breathe. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a car passing outside. The ordinary world continuing, completely unaware that my entire history had just been rewritten. Madison stared at the floor. I had never seen her look small before. Even as children, she had taken up space like it belonged to her by birthright. But now her shoulders curved inward, her hands locked together between her knees, as if she were trying to physically hold herself in place. I wish I could say I pitied her. I didn't. I was too busy grieving the version of my life that had never been real. For 15 years, I had carried shame that did not belong to me. I had shaped myself around accusations manufactured in someone else's mouth. I had apologized to romantic partners for being hard to love, convinced that if my own mother could give up on me, anyone eventually would. And all that time, my mother had been sitting in this same house, believing I had thrown her away. We had both been lonely for the same reason. Madison. Attorney Miller closed the folder but didn't pack it away. That detail mattered. Nothing here was finished. There will be a short break, he said gently. We'll continue with the financial provisions afterward. People stood too quickly, like they needed to escape the eye contact. Coffee was poured. Whispered conversations erupted in corners. I caught fragments. I had no idea. She swore, Natalie said. How could she? Every sentence was a rearranging of memory. You could almost watch them dragging old moments into new light, testing whether they still made sense. They didn't. I stayed where I was, letters still in my arms. I didn't trust myself to join the conversations. If someone apologized, I might collapse. If someone defended Madison, I might explode. Both felt dangerous. I saw my uncle, the one who had scolded me at my father's funeral. He tried to look at me, failed, then tried again. His mouth opened like he might say something. He didn't. Guilt is heavy. Sometimes it steals language. I stepped into the hallway to breathe. That's when I heard Madison. Her voice was low, urgent, coming from the corner near the stairs. She had her phone pressed to her ear, turned slightly away, but panic makes people careless. No, you don't understand, she whispered. She has everything. The cabinet, the letters, I don't know what else Mom kept. A pause. I need you to find out what they can actually use. My skin went cold. Use. Evidence. Consequences. She wasn't grieving. She was strategizing. She looked up and saw me. The call ended immediately. Her hand dropped, but her face couldn't recover fast enough. Fear lingered there, naked and undeniable. For years I had watched her perform certainty. Now I was watching calculation without control. We stood there in the hallway, sisters who had shared bedrooms and birthdays and whispered jokes after lights out. I searched for something familiar in her. I found nothing. Before either of us could speak, Aunt Helen appeared again, like she had been appointed by fate to interrupt Madison at exactly the right moments. She took my arm. Natalie, she said softly, come with me. We went into the kitchen, away from the noise. Her eyes filled with tears before she even began. 2 years ago, she said, your mother called me in the middle of the night. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she had found something in Madison's room. She wouldn't tell me what, but she kept saying, I've made a terrible mistake about my daughter. My breath caught. Aunt Helen squeezed my hand. She made me promise not to confront Madison yet. She said she needed proof. She said she had to make sure you would be protected. Protected. Even at the end, my mother had been mothering. She was scared, Aunt Helen whispered. But she was determined. I've never heard her sound so clear. I nodded because if I tried to speak, I would drown. When we returned to the living room, people hurried back to their seats as if afraid the truth might continue without them. Madison avoided looking at me. Attorney Miller resumed his place at the front. We will now proceed to the financial matters, he said. The words sounded sterile, administrative. They were anything but. He read carefully, methodically, withdrawals over years, small enough individually to escape attention, devastating when combined. Repairs that never happened, medical costs no one remembered, transfers that created a quiet, consistent siphon. Then the mortgage. A loan taken against the house my parents had paid for decades ago, paperwork redirected so my mother would not see it, a signature that experts would later question. Gasps broke through the room now, uncontrolled. Money has a way of clarifying betrayal for people who struggled to grasp emotional theft. Madison shook her head, whispering, "No, no, no," like repetition might reverse time. I studied her. I expected rage toward her, but what I felt was colder. Understanding. She had needed me gone because 2 daughters mean witnesses. 2 daughters mean shared responsibility, shared oversight, shared inheritance. If I was selfish, unreliable, absent, then she was indispensable. If I was cut off, she was alone with everything, including the money. Attorney Miller spoke about documentation, about how institutions respond to irregularities, about processes already in motion. His tone never changed, but the implications gathered weight with every sentence. Madison was not just exposed. She was cornered. Then he returned to my mother's final instruction. "Natalie has the authority to decide how she wishes to proceed," he said. Your mother wanted her to have her voice back. Again, everyone looked at me. I felt it differently this time. Not accusation, expectation, as if I were about to pass judgment on the entire room. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about my mother sitting alone at night, discovering the pile of letters in a safe, realizing her child had been reaching for her the entire time. I wondered how long she cried. I wondered how many apologies she rehearsed in empty air. Madison's eyes lifted toward me. There it was. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. For 15 years, she had decided what I was allowed to know. Now she had to live with what I knew. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because the law would speak. The documents would speak. My mother had made sure of that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't required to fight to be believed. The truth had arrived with witnesses. And Madison, finally, had nowhere left to hide. I walked out of that house without making a speech. Some people expected one. I saw it in the way their bodies leaned toward me, waiting for anger, for tears, for something dramatic they could carry home and repeat later, a clean ending to a messy revelation. But I had already performed for this family for 15 years. I had been the apologetic daughter, the distant daughter, the selfish daughter, the one who could be discussed like a rumor instead of a person. I was done giving them scenes. So I gathered the copies Attorney Miller offered, tucked my mother's letter safely into my bag, and left while conversations restarted in careful, horrified whispers behind me. No one stopped me. No one knew how. Outside, the air felt brutally fresh, like stepping out of a hospital after bad news and realizing the sun still exists. I stood on the walkway for a moment, shaking, not from fear, but from the collapse of something I had carried too long. For 15 years, Madison had owned the narrative. By dinner tomorrow, that ownership would be gone. I drove back to Chicago the next morning with the radio off. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head, especially the line she had written in the first note. "I found your letters." I imagined her opening that safe. I imagined her sitting on the edge of Madison's bed, hands trembling, reading years of my life in one night. Promotions, loneliness, holidays, questions, love that had nowhere to land. How did she breathe through that? How did she forgive herself for believing I had abandoned her? How did she forgive Madison for making her believe it? I wasn't sure I could forgive anyone yet. I was still trying to forgive myself for giving up. By the time the skyline appeared in the distance, my grief had hardened into something else. Resolve. The first call came 8 weeks later. Tuesday morning. I was at my desk reviewing a report when my phone buzzed with Attorney Miller's name. I stepped into a conference room and closed the door. His voice was calm, professional, but underneath it I heard the hum of machinery already in motion. "There have been developments," he said. Of course there had. Paper moves, institutions respond. Once truth is documented, it develops momentum of its own. He told me that federal authorities responsible for mail security had opened an inquiry. Interfering with correspondence, especially over a sustained period, is not treated as a family misunderstanding. It is treated as something else entirely. The letters my mother kept, the ones I carried, the notes Madison had attached, those were patterns. Patterns become cases. Financial institutions had also begun their own investigations. The irregular withdrawals, the mortgage, the signatures. Banks do not like surprises, and they especially dislike documentation that suggests fraud. There would be reviews, interviews, timelines. I leaned against the conference table and let the information settle. "Do I need to do anything?" I asked. "Not right now," he said. "Your mother anticipated that. She organized the material so the process wouldn't depend on your emotional energy." Of course she did. Even in death, she was still trying to make it easier for me. The social consequences arrived before the legal ones. News travels faster in families than viruses. By the time investigations were mentioned aloud, everyone already knew what the will had revealed. My uncle called first. I stared at his name on my phone for a long time before answering. The last time we'd spoken, he had told me my father died disappointed in me. Now his voice shook. "Natalie," he said, "I owe you an apology I can't fix." He told me Madison had insisted she couldn't reach me at the hospital, that when she finally did, I'd refuse to come. He had repeated that story for years, passed it like inheritance. "I helped destroy how people saw you," he whispered. I closed my eyes. I wanted to tell him he should have asked me directly. I wanted to tell him adults are responsible for verifying cruelty before spreading it. But mostly, I heard something else. A man who finally understood he had been manipulated. "I came as soon as she told me how bad it was," I said quietly. "You know that now." "Yes," he said. "I do." Other calls followed. Cousins, old neighbors, friends of my mother's who admitted they had whispered, speculated, judged. Some cried. Some tried to explain. A few asked for forgiveness they had not earned. I didn't know what to give them yet. My emotional vocabulary was still under construction. But one thing was undeniable. The family that had treated me like an absence was now treating Madison like a warning. No one wanted to be associated with her version of events anymore. The fortress she built had turned into a cell. I heard pieces of her situation from a distance. People stopped taking her calls. Offers of help evaporated. Those who had once admired her dedication now questioned every memory they had involving her. Trust is currency. Once bankrupt, it is almost impossible to reissue. I did not celebrate this. I didn't dance in my kitchen or tell friends with glee. What I felt was quieter. Balance. For once, consequences were landing in the correct place. 6 weeks after Attorney Miller's call, I had to return to Connecticut to handle estate logistics, paperwork, property evaluations, meetings. I stayed at the same hotel. I told myself I would be in and out, clinical, efficient, untouched. I underestimated how unfinished everything still was. Because on my second evening there, as I crossed the lobby toward the elevator, someone said my name. I knew the voice before I turned. Madison. She looked different. Not theatrical. Not polished. The shine had been stripped away by sleeplessness and fear. Her coat hung wrong on her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back without care. She walked toward me like someone approaching a judge. "Natalie," she said, breathless. "Please, we need to talk." There it was. Need. For 15 years she had controlled access. Now, she was requesting it. I felt something inside me steady itself. The girl who begged for explanations would have rushed to fill the silence. The woman I had become knew silence was power. I looked at my sister, and for the first time in my life, she had no script. What happened next would not be written by her. It would be written by truth. And truth, unlike memory, keeps records. Madison stopped a few feet in front of me, like there was an invisible line she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross anymore. For most of my life, she had never hesitated. She had walked into my rooms, my conversations, my relationships, and rearranged them to her liking. She had spoken for me, over me, around me. She had narrated my intentions to other people with absolute confidence, and they had believed her because she sounded certain. Now she looked like certainty had abandoned her. "Natalie, please," she said again, softer this time. "Just hear me." The lobby around us continued its polite evening rhythm, rolling suitcases, the low murmur of strangers checking in, the clink of glasses from the bar. Ordinary life, indifferent to catastrophe. I used to think moments like this would feel cinematic, that everything would freeze while justice unfolded. But the world rarely pauses for personal earthquakes. I set my bag down beside my leg, not to stay, but to steady myself. "I'm listening," I said. And that was already more than she had given me in 15 years. Up close, I could see what the last weeks had done to her. The sharp edges of control had dulled. Her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning my face, searching for mercy, for weakness, for any familiar door she could still open. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said quickly. "I was trying to protect Mom. You know how she was. She worried about everything. You leaving it broke her. I just softened it. I made it easier. Softened it." I almost laughed. "You told her I hated her," I said. Madison flinched. "I didn't say hate. You told her I called her a burden." "I thought you felt that way," she insisted. "You left. You never came back." I stared at her. "I wrote to her every month." She shook her head too fast. "I didn't know what to do with those. If she read them, she would have expected you to come home. She would have hoped. And then you wouldn't, and it would crush her all over again." The logic was breathtaking. Cruelty disguised as management. "So you decided the solution was to make sure she believed I didn't love her at all?" I asked. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't move me the way they used to. I had spent years mistaking her emotion for sincerity. They are not the same thing. "I was there," she whispered. "I was the one taking care of her. I gave up my life." And there it was. The ledger. Sacrifice, according to Madison, always required compensation. "You didn't give up your life," I said quietly. "You built it around being the only one she had left." Her mouth opened, then closed. I watched the realization land that I could see through her now. Completely. The machinery, the motivations, the fear of losing control. For a long time, I had been the younger sister trying to catch up. Now I was the auditor. She stepped closer. "They're talking about investigations," she said, voice dropping. "Banks. Federal people. Natalie, if you just tell them you don't want to pursue it, they'll calm down." Mom was old. Things get confused. I felt something cold settle into place inside me. For 15 years, I had paid the emotional price for her decisions. Now she was asking me to pay the legal one too. "I didn't start any of this," I said. "But you can stop it," she pressed. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I can't." And the truth was, even if I could, I wouldn't. Because stopping it would mean agreeing, once again, to disappear so she could survive. I had done enough disappearing. We stood there, the past stretched out between us like wreckage. I thought about birthdays spent staring at silent phones, Christmas mornings where I told myself independence was freedom instead of exile, nights I lay awake wondering what fundamental flaw made my own mother give up. Every one of those moments had been engineered, curated, delivered to me by the woman now begging for relief. "You read them," I said suddenly. "What?" "My letters. You opened them. You read every word I wrote to Mom." Madison looked away. I took a step toward her. I told her about promotions I was proud of, about heartbreaks I didn't know how to survive. I asked about her garden. I told her I missed her. "You read those things, and still decided I was better off erased." Her lips trembled. "I was angry," she whispered. "You got out. I stayed." Ah. Finally, something honest. Envy is quieter than hatred, but it lasts longer. "You could have left," I said. "No," she answered immediately. "I couldn't. I was needed. And I wasn't allowed to be," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied her face, trying to find the sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The girl who once held my hand on the first day of school. I wondered when she had turned into someone who could build a life on isolation and call it love. Maybe slowly, maybe all at once. Maybe I would never know. but understanding her origin would not change her impact. You made me believe my mother didn't love me, I said. The sentence hung between us, enormous and irreversible. Madison covered her mouth. I continued, because I needed her to hear it, even if it was too late. I built an entire identity around that belief. I chose people who treated me like I was temporary. I left jobs before they could fire me. I apologized for existing. Do you know what that does to a person? She shook her head, crying openly now. No, she said. Of course she didn't. She had never been the one abandoned in the story she wrote. I picked up my bag. Here was the moment. The crossroads. The place where movies usually deliver redemption or revenge. What I felt was neither. What I felt was completion. I'm not interfering, I told her. Whatever happens next will happen because of what you did, not because of what I say. She nodded frantically, as if agreement might soften physics. But I need something from you, I added. Hope flickered in her expression, quick and desperate. You will sign whatever documents are required to acknowledge the truth, I said. For the family, for the records. No more reinterpretations, no more performances. She swallowed. And after that, I continued, you stay out of my life. The hope collapsed. Natalie. I'm serious, I said. No calls, no visits, no messages through other people. If I ever want contact, I'll initiate it. Until then, you respect the distance you spent 15 years creating. She stared at me like I had struck her. But distance was her language. I was simply becoming fluent. Madison nodded. She would sign. She would agree. Because for the first time, she understood she had no leverage left. I looked at her one last time. I didn't feel triumph. I felt grief for the sister I had lost long before I knew she was gone. Then I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, Madison didn't follow. For 15 years, she had controlled every path between me and the people I loved. Tonight, she finally had to watch me leave without her. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. After I left Madison in that hotel lobby, I expected to feel powerful. Isn't that how these stories usually go? The victim finally speaks, the villain finally trembles, and something inside clicks into place like a lock turning. But when the elevator doors closed, I leaned back against the mirrored wall and felt something else entirely. Exhaustion. 15 years of carrying a lie is heavy. Even after you put it down, your arms still shake from the memory of the weight. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my hands. They looked the same. No visible transformation. No mark announcing that justice had begun its slow, official march. But deep inside, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I was no longer asking, why didn't my mother love me? Now I knew. She had. Every day. Someone had simply stood between us and edited the evidence. The legal process moved the way weather systems do, slowly, inevitably, with forces too large for one person to redirect. I received updates through Attorney Miller. Reviews had turned into formal actions, paperwork requested, interviews scheduled. Institutions that function on documentation, not emotion, had started tracing the patterns my mother left behind. I didn't attend everything. I didn't need to. My part had already happened in that living room, in that hallway, in the moment I chose not to lie to protect my sister. I had told the truth. The rest belonged to systems built for exactly this kind of thing. What surprised me was how little satisfaction I felt. I had imagined revenge would be bright, almost electric. Instead, it was quiet, administrative, necessary, like setting a broken bone. Months passed. Madison made decisions of her own. Agreements were reached. Consequences arranged. I heard the outcomes the way you hear about distant storms, aware of damage, aware of inevitability, but no longer standing in the rain. What mattered to me was something else. There was still one envelope. Attorney Millerly had mentioned it after everything calmed down. He had held it back deliberately, honoring my mother's instructions. For Natalie, it said on the front, in her familiar, careful handwriting, only when justice is done. I kept postponing it, because as long as it remained sealed, one question still lived inside it, suspended and unanswered. Did she truly love me? I had heard her say it through legal statements, through evidence, through the reconstruction of events. But love filtered through tragedy is different from love spoken directly. I was afraid of how badly I still needed to hear it. 6 months after the will reading, I finally drove back to the house. My house. The word still startled me. The mortgage fraud had been unraveled, the paperwork corrected. What my parents built was no longer tangled in deception. It stood the way it used to, solid, patient, waiting. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and memory. I walked straight to my mother's study and sat at her desk. The one I had seen from doorways my entire childhood. The place where she paid bills, wrote grocery lists, planned holidays. The envelope waited in my bag like a heartbeat. I placed it on the desk and ran my fingers over my name. For Natalie. Not the daughter who left. Not the disappointment. Not the absence. Natalie. I opened it carefully. Inside was a thick letter, pages and pages, and a small USB drive taped to the last sheet. My mother always believed in backup. I started reading. She wrote about the day I was born, how loud I was, how determined. She wrote about the way I followed her into the garden, asking the names of flowers until she made games out of it. She wrote about my first day of school, how I pretended not to be scared so she wouldn't worry. I laughed through tears. I had forgotten some of those things. She hadn't. Then she wrote about Chicago, about how proud she was of my career, how she kept clippings, how she searched my name online just to see my face. I watched you grow, she wrote, even when I thought you were growing away from me. The pages blurred. Then came the part that mattered most. The silence was not your choice, she wrote. And it was not your heart. I see that now. I am so sorry I didn't fight harder to see it sooner. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I loved you every day, she continued, even on the days I thought you had stopped loving me, especially on those days. Something inside me broke open. 15 years of rehearsed rejection collapsed under the weight of a sentence so simple it almost hurt. I loved you, always. My hands trembled as I picked up the USB drive. I found an old laptop in the drawer, plugged it in, and clicked on the first file. Static. Then her voice. Weaker. Slower. But hers. Hi, Natalie, she said, shy, like she was intruding. I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but I hope you do. I cried immediately. She talked about ordinary things. The neighbor's dog, a book she was reading, a recipe she ruined, stories about my father I had never heard before, advice about rest, about choosing people who chose me back, and threaded through every recording like a promise she refused to let disappear. I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry. The last file was recorded 3 days before she died. Her breath was thin. Natalie, she whispered, you were never the daughter who left. You were the daughter who kept trying. I see that now. Please remember me loving you, not missing you. I laid my head on the desk and sobbed until the sound emptied out of me. When the tears finally slowed, something unexpected took their place. Peace. Not perfect. Not magical. The lost years still existed. Nothing could return them. But the question that had haunted every version of my life had been answered. I had been loved. The tragedy was not absence. It was interference. And interference, unlike love, can be named, documented, prosecuted. Love, meanwhile, survives discovery. I looked around the study, at the cabinet, at the desk, at the quiet courage my mother must have gathered in her final years to set this all in motion. She couldn't give me time back, but she gave me truth. And truth, in the end, gave me back myself. I pressed play on her last message one more time. I always loved you, she said. This time, I believed her. Some stories hurt because of what was done. Others hurt because of what was hidden. Natalie's journey isn't only about betrayal, or even justice. It's about what happens when a human being builds an identity around a lie they never chose. For 15 years, she believed she was unwanted, difficult to love, easy to abandon. And in the end, the most powerful revelation wasn't the crimes, the investigations, or the consequences. It was this. She had been loved the entire time. The silence wasn't rejection. It was interception. How many relationships in real life collapse under misunderstandings someone else quietly manufactures? How many people carry shame that was carefully planted there? This story asks us to look again, to question the narratives handed to us, and to be brave enough to reach across distance ourselves. If Natalie's story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone you've lost, or someone you still have time to call, then you already understand why we tell stories like this. Subscribe to Hanji via Iyagi and walk with us into more journeys of truth, heartbreak, and healing. And if you have your own story, we're listening.